Welcome to the book show. Graham, this is episode 8, I think.
It's amazing, isn't it? Where are these 8 weeks of wonderful television gone?
Yes.
2 to go.
2 to go, and lots of marvellous books.
There are.
There's letters of, this was Letters of Note, lists of notes just arrived. Letters of Note was a huge hit last Christmas. It's still selling well. A marvellous compilation by Sean Usher of extraordinary letters from famous people and unknown people. Actual facsimiles of the letters themselves in many cases, photographs of the people, and then this year the big seller is going to be the new one, which is Lists of Note, and it has the most extraordinary range of people and range of lists. There's Susan Sontag's list of rules for parenting. There's a list of nursery rhyme violence. Someone has analysed nursery rhymes and listed all the rather hideous violence that occurs in nursery rhymes. There's Roald Dahl's list of potential words, gobblefunk, and all his words that he was making up, some of which he crossed out and some of which he used in his stories. What else have we got? There's Marilyn Monroe's must-do list. There's a list of advice for young ladies written in 1830. There's Houdini's scene and prop list, all the things he needed to have with him for his various tricks and so on. There's Galileo's shopping list, and it includes food and all sorts of things he needed for his scientific experiments. Ernest Hemingway's lists of books you ought to read, and of course, Graham, they're all men, apart from one. He does actually include Wuthering Heights, so I was relieved to see that. And Billy Wilder's tips for screenwriters. I mean, that's just a tiny taste of these extraordinary lists, photos of the people, in many cases samples of their handwriting and so on. Lists of note to accompany letters of note. 2 fascinating books, yeah. And I will just mention this lovely young woman, Laura Decker, who at the age of 16 sailed round the world on her own. One girl, one dream. It's taken from her diary entries. It's got photographs and the log from her book, and it's a very inspiring book for young people particularly.
Wonderful.
Now you're going to be talking to...
Well, I've got a nice, I'm reviewing Ian Rankin's latest collection, the John Rebus collection. I've got Josh Emmett's new book, barbecuing, and then I'm talking to Patrick Reynolds, the great architectural photographer, on his splendid new book, Bungalows.
Yes. Fascinating. And I'll be talking to Tina Makariti, where the Rekohubone sings. Tina, when your first book was published 2 or 3 years ago, Once Upon a Time in Aotearoa, there was a general feeling out there in the community that this was a new writer that we were to watch out for. And it has certainly been worth watching out for you, because this new one, where the Rekohubone sings, is an absolute triumph.
Thank you.
Talk to me a bit about how you started writing it.
When I was writing Once Upon a Time in Aotearoa, they were short stories.
Yes.
But in the back of my mind, actually, for a number of years, I'd had a bigger story that needed attention, and I guess with those big stories, they kind of sit in the background of your life for a while, and you think, I need to find a way to write about those things. So probably from really the inception was the birth of my youngest daughter in 2002, and I'd always known that we had some kind of link to our Moriori ancestry, and when she was born she was given an ancestral name that was connected to there, and so I'd always thought, okay, so what does that mean? How I don't know what it means to be Moriori, and I'd always known there was a link, but how do I express that? How does she understand herself that way? Because carrying a name is a closer connection,
yeah.
And so I carried that with me, and I thought it might be non-fiction, and I wrote the short stories, and that was just learning, figuring out how to write, what my voice would be, how I would tell stories, and I do love writing non-fiction, but this story was quite a big, difficult thing, and with a lot of hidden, lost history in it. So I felt that fiction was the way to go in the end, and after while I was actually just finishing the short stories, the opportunity came up to do the PhD in creative writing at Victoria, and that was the first time they'd offered it, and I thought I need to do a lot of research I need the support of something like that because it's a big project. So that's the way I went about it. Yeah.
So that hidden history. Now, first of all, Rekohu is the name for the Chatham Islands. And for me, as a Pākehā reader, who actually many, many years ago had some New Zealand history in my degree, knew nothing about the Moriori or had wrong ideas. But also I had a notion that somewhere, sometime, Māori tribes had attacked Moriori on the Chatham Islands, but that's as much as I knew. So just fill us in on that story, that lost history.
Yeah, well for me, I had what a lot of New Zealanders had in terms of an understanding of this history, which was that Moriori were pre-European, pre-Māori people on the, I don't know whether it was the North or the South Island. I didn't even know the Chatham Islands existed until I was an adult and read Michael King's book, and that stayed with me for a while. So I think that was the general history that had come to us through some kind of erroneous, incorrect versions of history that had been printed in the school journals early on. And the Moriori Hokotihi Trust Board from the island and a number of people have rewritten those histories for the school journal now, which is fantastic. So that was one thing. I knew my versions were wrong, and so I then went and did more history. I'm studying history, but the history can only tell us so much as well. So I wanted to kind of access what it's like, what it might have been like for those people that went through those things. And it wasn't just the people on the island who were invaded in 1835. So it wasn't, we had the story that Māori decimated Moriori and then Europeans came. It actually happened after Europeans came. Moriori and Māori had been separated for centuries. They developed completely different cultures, and when European whalers and sealers came and rediscovered, so to speak, the Chatham Islands, Māori then rediscovered the Chatham Islands as well.
And the Moriori were completely peaceful, peace-loving, and it was part of their culture.
That's the extraordinary thing about that culture was, I guess you find yourself on a small island and you think, how do we, I mean, they were very, the wisdom of those very older people was extraordinary. They said, we won't get on very, we won't last very long if we
fight
this warfare going. And they absolutely forbade any killing or any of the kind of actions of war.
So you could fight until you drew the first blood, and at that point you had to stop.
Right.
And that was part of their culture.
Yeah.
Now you divide the novel into 3 separate stories. There are 3 strands that all interweave. Can you talk about those 3 strands?
Yeah.
I mean, 2 of them are 100 years apart, aren't they?
Well, it was very important for me that this is about us now. It's not about, I mean, those things that happen then are important, but only in the context of what do we do with that information now? How do we understand ourselves now? So there is a contemporary story of 2 young people who,
the twins.
Twins, and kind of slightly oppositional, but because they're twins, they have the same history, but how do they understand that differently? Because, I mean, another thing that I work with is this idea that the culture is not necessarily about the colour of your skin. Especially, I mean, if you look at me or a lot of people I know, we don't all look the same.
But also
it's
the
not
twins,
about that.
it's a wonderful thing. One of the twins with one Pākehā and one Māori parent, the twins come out one very white and one very brown.
It's not unusual in Māori families to have different shades of skin colour.
It's a wonderful idea to go into those issues.
Yeah, and so that was as important to me, I think, in exploring all of this. And so there's another storyline which is in the 1880s of, I guess, an ancestral connection. It's all intertwined, obviously, and that's one Māori ancestor and one Moriori ancestor and their story and how they came together, because that was forbidden. So those kinds of relationships weren't supposed to happen. So,
and in fact, he was a slave, wasn't he?
Well, he was a descendant of a slave and had kind of by default taken that position in the family because, you know, there was a kind of taint, and I mean, that happened. There was a lot of shame, and it did affect people down the generations.
Which is why the twins' mother, in fact, had sort of shut out her whole background because of the shame and the hurt that had gone on, the pain of it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm quite lucky in my family. We didn't know much, but we felt proud of this connection. Good. But in a lot of families I encountered, they found out as adults, that stuff that their parents had never told them that they didn't know, and they had to rediscover that culture and people that have a much stronger connection to that culture. And I thought that story, you hear it again and again, of the hidden nature of the things that happen to those families.
Mm-hmm. Now the third strand is this incredible disembodied voice that, as a Pākehā woman, middle class, I found initially, I thought, oh, this is so strange, and then it grew and grew on me. It's a wonderful, wonderful voice.
So that's Emi, who is disembodied. He was killed in the invasion in 1835, and so he doesn't go where he's supposed to go. And
he couldn't leave because it was unfinished
because
business.
of the way he was killed. And I mean that's something that makes sense in terms of our culture, and the reason why things are done that way is so that people, so kind of desecration and stuff. I mean, that was part of the way things were done.
So what's his role in the novel?
Well, the funny thing about Emi is that he came to me first, and I was doing the research and I was busy, I'm doing the critical research, I'm not writing the novel yet. And he started waking me up at like 4 o'clock in the morning, and his voice was going, I've got the story to tell, I want to tell the story. And so, he was a very strong character voice from the beginning for me. And I just had to, do what I was told. Like, that doesn't happen often. I think it might have happened to me twice, and I feel very fortunate that it's happened at all, that one of your characters kind of says, I want to tell my story.
Now, what about the story of the carvings that are on the trees? Can you just tell us a bit about that and maybe read us a tiny extract?
Because these are extraordinary,
only on Rikohu, the Chatham Islands, aren't they?
I've heard that there might be 1 or 2 other places in the world, but it's a World Heritage Site because it's the only, it's one of the rarest things to have carvings on trees, dendroglyphs. Quite often you see them in caves, but I'll read a little piece about Lula, the contemporary character, encountering the dendroglyphs. And I think part of my thing about it was when I first saw them, I thought, will it be a very sad experience? And I'll read what happens for Lula.
Thank you.
Deeper in, she's going into the forest. Deeper in were larger kōpi, and kōpi's the name for the karaka tree on the Chatham Islands. Deeper in were larger kōpi, their roots thick and knotted at the base, drawing the eye up to straight, broad, moss-covered trunks. And there, where the moss had been cleared, rako momori, curved, heart-shaped faces, grinning, crouching on light feet, proud feathered top knots above. A smile began in her chest and spread through her body. This was not a place of sadness or pain. It was only joy that radiated from the ancestral carvings. Be light, they said. Be happy. Laugh. And she could almost hear the laughter from their open mouths. She walked from tree to tree, looking on each for signs. Sometimes they were faint, sometimes twisted by the natural growth of the bark. 1 or 2 bore other shapes, other spirits, a butterfly, a figure she couldn't discern. She saw that despite everything that had happened to their people and their world, there was no resentment here. The figures were alive, faded in some places, sick in others, but alive. Their wide smiles reminded her of Buddhist monks in saffron robes, how wise of the ancient ones to make images of their loved ones in living wood, to ensure they continued, not museum pieces, not objects to be preserved, but living, breathing, growing entities.
That's wonderful. Thank you for being with us this evening. Tina Makaliti.
Thank you.
2 books for you this evening, 1 each from my favourite book genres, crime fiction and cooking. First up then, the crime fiction title, The Beat Goes On by Ian Rankin, published by Orion Books. Ian Rankin is, in my opinion, one of the great contemporary crime fiction writers, with his 19 Inspector John Rebus novels. Certainly he's won almost every crime fiction award in existence, some of them multiple times. I'm a huge fan and look forward eagerly to every new title. This latest one is somewhat different because it is the complete collection of Rebus short stories. Over the years, Ian Rankin has had many short stories published in crime magazines and broadcast on radio. Now those featuring Rebus have been brought together for the first time, and along with some new material, including 2 brand new stories written specifically for this collection, The Passenger and The 3-Pint Problem, it is the ultimate Rebus short story collection. And at 450 plus pages, there's a lot of reading. I was also fascinated with a 14-page section at the end of the book where the author talks about his writing career right back to teenage days at school and university, how he came up with the name John Rebus, what influenced his plots and settings, the problems he ran into when he retired Rebus at the age of 60 with all his fans, and introduced his new character, Malcolm Fox. This is a must-have book for crime fiction lovers and Rankin aficionados, and also makes a great introduction for anyone who has not previously come across Detective Inspector John Rebus and the dark, twist-filled stories in which he stars. I noticed the Sunday Star Times reviewer in London said, and I quote, "The book is a reminder that the tapas lunch of a collection of stories can be just as enjoyable as a novel's 3-course meal." And I must say, I agree. The beat goes on, don't miss it. Now, from a famous Scot to a famous Kiwi, the Michelin-starred chef Josh Emmett, who is the chef behind Auckland's Ostro and co-owner of Rata and Madame Wu restaurants in Queenstown. And on Friday this week, he publishes his second cookbook, Josh's Backyard Barbecue, a handsome hardback from Random House. Like many of us, Josh loves nothing more than to fire up the barbie and hang out with friends and family at the weekends. Cooking on the barbecue remains his preferred catering solution for large gatherings, and I was interested to read in the book that when he and his wife Helen were married 3 years back, barbecues were central to the catering when he had local Coromandel chefs cooking the various courses. In his introduction, Josh says the book is aimed at anyone who loves to barbecue, from more seasoned cooks to those still learning, and includes a whole range of recipes from a simple grilled flounder served with butter and lemon to a slow-cooked brisket. He's also included menu planners throughout the book so you can create whole barbecue meals without having to decide what might go best together. He's done the thinking for you, as it were. Your barbecue repertoire will be transformed. There are sections on vegetables, shellfish, fish, beef, lamb, pork and chicken, all illustrated in wonderful full-colour photography by noted food photographer Karen Scott. It's a terrific book, and I reckon a great Christmas gift, especially for that hard-to-buy-for man.
I'm going to review Reach by Lawrence Fernley. She's a lovely novelist from the South Island, and her novels all have a real South Island feel. Many of you will know The Hut Builder and also Edwin and Matilda. Reach is about a woman artist, and the whole novel she is preparing for her exhibition, which happens at the very end of the novel. Her partner is Marcus, is a vet who's left his wife and his young daughter to be with Quinn, the artist. And so one of the things the novel really explores is the details of connections between people and the pain that is caused when relationships change. There's a third character who is a deep sea diver. Callum, he parks his van, which he lives in when he's not deep down in the ocean, parks his van at this coastal town very near, just really across the road from where Quinn and Marcus live. And there's fascinating stuff in this novel about deep sea diving. And Lawrence Fernley draws comparisons, I think, between the act of creativity, of creating art, works of art, and this extraordinary experience of being really, really deep. And we're talking about divers who need to spend a long, long time in decompression chambers before they can come back up and so on. He's a professional diver, Callum, and the peace and the beauty of that deep, deep underwater scene is quite gorgeous. She captures it beautifully. The relationships between these three are really important. It's about reaching out. It's also about taking risk, I think. Risk emotionally, risk physically when you go down into the depths of the sea, risk when you create art or writing or any sort of creativity and put it out there to the public to be viewed and therefore judged. So those themes all come together in this quite gentle but very subtle examination of all these things that are in the lives of these three really wonderful, rounded characters. It's a fascinating novel. Lawrence Fearnley has been writing now for a long time, and I think is one of our most treasured New Zealand novelists.
Patrick, welcome to the book show, and warmest congratulations on this truly splendid book being published this Friday.
Thank you very much, Graham.
Bungalow from Heritage to Contemporary. Now, you're New Zealand's leading architectural photographer, and you've got several other very attractive books already published that you've been responsible for the photography for. Villa from Heritage to Contemporary, the sister title, and Big House, Small House, just to mention a couple. But truly, I think this new one is the most spectacular and beautiful one yet.
Oh, wonderful.
Now, we're told in the book that if you live in a house built before 1940, chances are it's a bungalow. Tell us about the bungalow and something of its origins and sort of how and why it developed.
Right. Well, the bungalow. Well, this is actually quite a complicated story. I mean, the word is Indian. It's one of the few words we have, like pajama and gymkhana, that we've stolen from Hindi, I think. And in the rest of the world, bungalow really just means a single-story detached house. In the same way that a villa in the rest of the world means a very grand detached house in the countryside. In New Zealand, we've kind of co-opted both those terms to mean quite specific things. Having said that, it's still a bit of a slippery definition. There's a classic form in New Zealand called the Californian bungalow, but in general, it's a lower pitched roof, timber or brick or stone plaster dwelling, built generally between the two wars, with a sort of a horizontal tone and a homeliness and some nod, generally a sort of a shingled rusticity towards an arts and crafts feel. The word, it's really interesting. If you do this, there's a thing you can do on Google where you can search for a word through the history of books called an Ngram viewer. And if you search the word bungalow in either all English language or British English, it peaks incredibly dramatically in 1920 and then falls away again really fast. It was actually quite a brief moment in time before other forms like Art Deco and modernism proper superseded bungalow. Bungalow really had a kind of short life, but at the end of the villa and the beginning, and then the post-war boom, really abandoned it for the brick and tile, unfortunately, mostly.
And there are a lot of them, of course, aren't there?
There are vast tracts of them because there was a population boom after the war, and there was our cities and towns spread. They spread particularly on the back of the electric tram, which was widespread throughout New Zealand, and then hot on the heels of that, the motor car. So these are generally whole suburbs. So edge city. You can tell if you're keen walking around your city or town, you can see the moment that the villas stopped and the bungalows started. Yeah, often like a watershed. Yeah.
Now, you've got 20 featured in here from right across the country, I think from Whangarei to Christchurch. I guess you spent a fair bit of time travelling last year and taking these. But tell us what happens when you arrive at your destination, you know, how you go about planning the photography, how long it takes for each property, and give us a typical day of your life when you're on the road.
Well, I mean, actually, it starts well before you arrive, and I'm sort of kind of like a farmer, really, completely obsessed with weather forecasts. Light is my only material. It's my raw material, and the quality of it really governs the quality of the shoot that you can conduct. And we live on a little, couple of islands strung in the middle of the Tasman that suffer fairly unpredictable weather. So actually, there's a great deal of negotiating with the owners and the necromancers of the weather forecast to time an arrival, and hopefully you get that right. To shoot an entire house, you want a full day, and I mean a full day with a big break, really, because the beginning and the ends of the days are the best. The lower light, more dramatic. I mean, basically, you can't turn a house around like you can a model in a studio. You've got to wait for the earth to do it for you. So it is a sort of slowish process, but that's rather wonderful because the place will open up for you. It can be, you know, burdensome for people trying to live their lives as you want to tidy up and so forth. But yeah, it's a day really, with a good lunch, with a good boozy lunch.
Good. But I guess generally people are happy to have their
Oh.
homes included. I mean, it's a positive outcome if it's a bit inconvenient at the time.
Oh, look, it's wonderful meeting the owners. I mean, generally there's all fascinating stories, and interesting people, and of course, you know, all getting around the country is really, really interesting. Yeah.
Well, let us look at three particular featured bungalows, with you telling us a bit about the background of each and something about the differences between them, starting at Franklin Road in Freeman's Bay in Auckland.
Oh, well, this is a favourite of mine, really, and occupied by dear friends as well. But I think it's a particularly good one for the book because it is updated. It was updated before Simon and David got hold of it, but it hasn't had the enormous job done on it. So it's still very much a bungalow. And they have added, you know, a spectacular joie de vivre to it, with colour, with their collection of personal objects and artworks. And so it's just completely full of life and undoes the problems of the bungalow. Its darkness, its sort of smallness. In fact, the best phrase in the book comes from David, one of the owners of that house, who described bungalows as granny dismal, which is absolutely brilliant. And they've done the classic thing of knocking down a few walls and just bringing colour and life into the bungalow. It's great.
And then we move across a couple of suburbs to Grey Lynn. Tell us about this one.
Oh, this is a great little. There's two or three really, really sensitively renovated bungalows in the book. This one is by Malcolm Walker, who is an absolute genius with an older house, seemingly to blow them apart yet still honour the original. So this is a bungalow alteration by Malcolm for Greg, who lives alone there and has you know, a fairly Spartan way of living, a very ordered one with some lovely contemporary furniture, and together Greg and Malcolm have made that, brought light into it, but yet it's still very recognisably a bungaloid.
A great contrast is the one in Fendleton in Christchurch.
Oh, well, that's a famous building, Los Angeles, and is now kind of heartbreaking, really, because of the earthquakes, especially because the owners lovingly really restored the building. This is a classic arts and crafts bungalow, or big black building with massive stone fireplaces, river stones. That, of course, suffered terribly in the earthquakes, and you'd have to read the book to get the
Find out what's happening.
the frightening and dramatic stories of that, and the struggle by the owners to restore it a second time. They had just finished.
Yes, it's an interesting story. Well, they're all interesting stories, actually. I mean, how did the stories get to be put on the page?
Oh, well, I worked with Nicole Stock, she edited the entire book, and about 8 other writers for different locations, including my wife, and they, you know, interviewed anyone central to the house, the current owners, architects, historians about the house, and drew those wonderful stories out. Yeah.
Well, their wonderful stories have become a wonderful book. Thanks for coming in, and congratulations again on this very fine piece of publishing.
Thank you, Graham. You're welcome.
Well, that's the show for this week. Thanks for joining us, and please join us again next week when Carol's got a couple of very interesting authors to speak to, haven't you?
Yes, I'm talking to Elspeth Sands with her wonderful memoir, What Lies Beneath, and also I'm talking to Mandy Hager, who's coming up from Wellington with her really inspiring teenage novel. So please watch next week. We look forward to seeing you.